Hey, if you want access to the transcripts, the show notes, and the links talked about as part of this episode, you can head to Seven, so the word all spelled out, seven-health.com/300. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Real Health Radio. I'm your host, Chris Sandel. I'm a nutritionist and a coach and an eating disorder expert, and I help people to fully recover. So I'm currently taking on new clients, and I fundamentally believe that people can change and that you can change and that you can fully recover despite what thoughts your eating disorder may be telling you. And after working with clients for over 15 years, I'm very good at helping people to achieve this. And where we focus is helping you to physically repair your body so your body can repair and recover, being able to develop resilience and constructive coping skills, and starting to live a life rather than just marking time. And this helps to create authenticity and connection and the ability to have spontaneity and freedom and to be invited out to a dinner and be able to be excited about that, as opposed to having panic ensue and thinking of ways I'm going to be able to get out of doing this or how I'm going to be able to compensate for this. To have the energy and the mental capacity for experiencing life and doing things that truly matter to you and that you want to do, rather than being at the mercy of the eating disorder thoughts and what they're asking you to do. So if you are tired and fed up with living with an eating disorder and you're ready to do what it takes to reach a place of full recovery, then I would love to help. You can send an email to info@7-health.com and just include the word coaching in the subject line, and then I can send over the further details of how to apply for a free recovery strategy call. So info@7-health.com, include the word coaching, and I can get the details over. So today on the show, it is a guest interview, and today I'm chatting with Talia Cecchele. And Talia has spent over 11 years supporting people as a registered dietitian for them to improve their health, and it was by chance that she fell into this specialist area of eating disorders. She has worked with hundreds of women and men to help them reverse the negative influence that diet culture and nutrition misconceptions and fad diets has had on their relationship with food. And Talia has worked in eating disorder inpatient and day patient units for the last 9 years in both the public and private settings in the UK and in Australia. She has experience supporting people across the spectrum of inpatient through to outpatient settings, which give her a broad knowledge and skill set to be able to adapt her treatment approach to meet the demands of people she is working with. Talia offers a compassionate, empathetic, and realistic approach to nutrition, and she doesn't believe in restrictive diets and lives by the mantra that change doesn't happen in your comfort zone. So I'd been aware of Talia for a few years now. I can remember there were times where I would be Googling a term or a topic connected to recovery, and on many occasions, it was her site that would come up for the term that I searched for. And I remember thinking, like, one, she's doing a really good job on the SEO front because this website just keeps popping up for all these different terms. But two, she's obviously writing about really great topics that people are interested in terms of recovery. But then more recently, I had Julie, who's one of the people who helps out at 7 Health. I asked her to compile a list of potential podcast guests and people for us to be able to reach out to. And Talia was someone who was added to that list. And so I was reminded of her once again, and I checked out more of her posts and her Instagram and decided to invite her on the show. So during the intro, when I'm chatting with Talia, I mentioned what we're going to cover or what I intended to cover, and we actually stick to it. So I won't repeat it here. You'll hear it in a moment. I really enjoyed this conversation. I like Talia's considered responses and how she's level-headed in her approach with recovery. And this is definitely one where there's some good actionable advice. So without further ado, let's get on with the show. Here is my conversation with Talia Cecchele. Hey, Talia, welcome to the show. I'm glad to be chatting with you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you are a dietitian and you work primarily with eating disorders and doing that in terms of helping people reach a place of full recovery. And there's quite a few areas that I want to talk about today. I know you've talked about overcoming compulsive exercise. There's stuff around digestive issues in recovery. I definitely want to go through RAVES because I know this is something that you've written about and it's not something I've really covered on the podcast before. But I guess just as a starting place, do you want to give listeners a bit of background on yourself? So who you are, what you do, what training you've done, that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, I'm a specialist dietitian and I've been working in eating disorders and disordered eating for about 8 years. I've been practicing for just over 11 or 12 years now. I studied in Australia, completed a Bachelor of Nutrition and Dietetics through Wollongong University, and worked in Sydney for a number of years before moving across to the UK. I currently work part-time freelance, so I'm the founder of TCN Clinic, Talia Cecchele Nutrition Clinic, and that's an online clinic, and we have a team of specialist eating disorder dietitians working with people through the range or spectrum of disordered eating all the way through to different clinical eating disorders, and also supporting people who might have a history of disordered eating or an eating disorder and want support with other medical or clinical issues, but from a non-restrictive or least restrictive approach. And then I work part-time as a therapy lead and dietitian at a private psychiatric hospital in London on the eating disorders unit. Yeah, regards to my training, I think like with any dietitian, you continue to develop skills as you progress through your career.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's always been centered around eating disorders, mostly from different psychological approaches and CBT, motivational interviewing, FBT. So I do have special interest in digestive issues and eating disorders, and also just supporting people with breaking food rules and overcoming food fears.
Nice. What prompted you to move to the UK? So I think that was in 2019 that happened. I mean, you picked a bad year to move. I'm not thinking about things.
Yeah, it was mid 2018.
Okay.
A combination of career opportunities. So at the time I was working I was trying to decide whether to specialise as a paediatric dietitian or jump into eating disorders. So I wanted to move somewhere that had more opportunities in both areas. And as most Aussies move over here, just the ability to travel and explore Europe.
Yeah. Yeah. How did you find the shift?
Not too bad, actually. I think clinically, the UK is set up very similarly to Australia. After the initial learning of different processes and things like that, I found it okay. I think it takes such a long time to learn the UK food system and brands of food and trying to learn how to say courgette instead of zucchini and remembering to say yogurt instead of yogurt. So that was probably more of a challenge than anything else.
Yeah. Does there feel like there's some differences in the systems between the UK and Australia? Or are there anything that stands out to you?
Yeah, I think one of I guess from a national health service perspective, especially with eating disorders in Australia, they have Medicare, which is their national health service. And within that now, just after I left, they introduced the 20 rebated sessions for dietitians for eating disorder support and the 40 sessions for psychologists. So I think that is a huge difference comparing Australia eating disorder support that in the UK. And then I think the main difference is also just the number of inpatient and day patient services, Australia versus the UK. Working in Sydney, there was only a small number of publicly funded beds in the whole of New South Wales versus in the UK and London. Comparative to Sydney, there are more options.
Yeah,
where there are significantly longer waiting lists here in the UK, to my knowledge, compared to Australia.
Yeah, I was never a nutritionist when I lived back in Australia. It's going back a very, very, very long time, so I don't really know what the systems are like. And so from your perspective, does it feel like people are getting a better quality service over in Australia than here, or no?
No, I think yes. And just from a few people I've spoken to that have either moved from Australia to the UK or UK to Australia. I'm talking about clients or patients that I've supported in the past.
Yeah.
I do think Australia is coming out on top.
Okay. Do you feel like you'll be here for a while?
I think a few more years.
It'd be a nice stint and getting to enjoy some good time. And when I read your Instagram, it looks like you've done some decent traveling outside of the pandemic. You've definitely clocked lots of places in Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. And took advantage of UK travel during the pandemic when it was possible. So yeah, it'll definitely be a good stint. I'm missing the Australian lifestyle and sun.
Yeah. If we go back to like you as a kid, like what was your relationship with food like? What was food like in your household growing up?
I come from an Italian background. My grandparents migrated from Italy to Australia after World War II. So I think I've grown up in a household where food was really central to celebrations and, you know, a lot more, I guess, traditional cooking.
Yeah.
And so my relationship with food was really good as a child. I absolutely loved cooking. It's always surprising when I tell people I used to pack my own lunch from about 8 years of age. So I always had that interest in it.
Yeah.
We'd bake for the whole family, make muffins. We'd all take them to school, myself and my sisters and my parents. My real interest in nutrition started when I was about 15. And I played representative netball for sort of regional area. And we had a sports dietitian come and provide a sports dietetic session. That's when I thought that being a dietitian would be a really cool career based off the one talk where a person got to talk about food for an hour. So that sparked my interest in dietetics. I would say that my relationship with food throughout majority of my life has been a healthy one.
Yeah.
There was just a few months in the sort of 15 to 16 years of age that I sort of described that I sort of dabbled in disordered eating in the way of looking at food labels, not really being aware of exactly what I was looking for. But I do remember there was a few months where I remember engaging in that behavior.
Yeah.
And it didn't develop into anything else. Yeah, now I say I have a very healthy relationship with food, and that's something that, you know, I don't have the lived experience of an eating disorder like some clinicians working in the eating disorder field do.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, what I can bring to support my clients and patients is to be aware that having a normal relationship with food exists, and it can be something that people can work towards and create.
Yeah. Nice. And look, I'm the same. I don't have a lived experience with an eating disorder. And I always talk about, I think there's pros and cons to that. Like the con is that I haven't walked a mile in your shoes. I don't know what it's like to live with an eating disorder. So I can't say that I've been there. And this is stuff that people have actually told me. Is like clients saying, hey, I don't have to wonder if you're fully recovered. I don't have to wonder if something is really going on behind closed doors, if you're relapsing or if you are fully recovered. It's like I feel very, very comfortable and confident in the fact that you have a healthy relationship with food, and that I can then talk about that and be a role model of sorts with people. I also think the fact that I haven't had an eating disorder means that I don't have my own bias of what my recovery journey was like and what I should do because of that. And not everyone who goes through recovery has this very biased view about everyone having to do what they did, but it comes up enough that people will totally disregard something because it wasn't important or relevant for them. And I think from my perspective, I'm much more open to like, let's look into all of these different things.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And just like going back to like your like Italian family, like I went to school with a guy who was Lebanese, and like his whole family lived like within like 2 streets of one another. Like every Sunday there would be people around. It'd be all the women who are in the kitchen making these incredible meals, and just this real sort of family, very close-knit family. Is that the same kind of thing that you had?
I wish it was. Some of my... So not my immediate family, but some of my sort of extended cousins would have the tomato day every year and do those sorts of very cultural things. We didn't to that degree, which I wish we had, but I'm very aware of those traditions happening. So it wasn't as to a large degree as that.
Yeah.
But still making those traditional foods on a much smaller scale.
Okay, sure. Yeah, there'll be a lot of time where there were a lot of people at his house.
Yeah.
A lot of cooking that would be going on for many, many hours.
Yeah, I think that's just amazing.
Oh, it's amazing. And I look back now and like typical 18-year-old, like that could be on offer and we'd be like, oh, let's go and get KFC or let's go and get McDonald's instead. And like now I would be like, I would just love that food. Anytime I go back, I'll always try and visit and eat that stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, typical 18-year-old.
Yeah, I think for me, the difference was that I wasn't really exposed to other cuisines until I really left school.
Okay.
So Asian stir fries and Lebanese food and Turkish food, Chinese, like I didn't really have that growing up. So it was very much just a lot of pasta.
Yeah.
Pizza every Saturday. So, very like Italian cuisine.
Yeah. And you said that there was that incident of a few months where you got more into the looking at labels and more of the disordered eating. Was that post this presentation that you'd seen by this sports dietitian?
It was, yeah. So then after that, we had a coach who sort of provided more nutrition education and she spoke about performance and she sort of gave us a very simplified, and you see this all the time, giving simplified do's and don'ts of what to eat, what not to eat.
Yeah. On
a couple of handouts. This is what you need to do. And I think at that time, I just took it quite seriously. And that's why I was checking labels, making sure things had, X, Y, Z. So that was post the dietitian. And the reason I sort of moved away from that is I experienced stomach pains for the first time in my life going through this period. And my mum one day was just like, that's enough. Like, we're ordering pizza tonight, period. And that's what I remember of it. That was my experience. And she said that, and I never sort of looked at the label again. I'm fully aware that could have grown into something a lot more serious, but it was just, I was lucky to not have it.
Totally.
It impacted me. Yeah.
Yeah. Because, you could have very easily gone to a dietitian who then recommended, let's remove all of these different things, looked at what you were eating and said, oh, we think that there could be a wheat intolerance, that no more pasta, no more pizza, all of this kind of stuff. And so for you to have the experience for your mom saying, we're getting pizza, and that was the thing that resolved it, I think is a really nice story, because that's not often how it goes.
No, it's not.
And so when it then kind of further progressed in terms of you starting to study as a dietitian, what was the goal in terms of, I want to work with a particular type of area, or you just went in saying, hey, I really like dietetics as a general thing and I'll figure it out?
Yeah, so when I started dietetics, I definitely had the thought that I would later specialise in sports nutrition.
Okay.
Because sport netball in particular was very much part of my life at the time. But then when I graduated, after having done the clinical placements, I definitely wanted to work in a clinical role. And then that sort of became the goal.
Okay.
Didn't know which exact clinical area, but just to work in a hospital.
Yeah. Okay. And so then how did eating disorders come about in terms of that being a specialty and being this area of interest for you?
Yeah. So I worked at one of Sydney's children's hospitals in my third year out of graduating.
Okay.
And it started as a 3-month contract. And on my very first day, I met with the manager and she was giving me the ward allocations. And one of them was the adolescent eating disorders unit. Prior to that, I had no interest in working in eating disorders. It was an area, like I think with many people, provokes a bit of anxiety.
Yeah.
For myself, and I know many dietitians, you don't really learn about how to support people with an eating disorder or disordered eating throughout university. So it's an area that a lot of people might shy away from until they learn more about it.
Yeah.
And so I started working on the adolescent eating disorders unit and I absolutely loved it. And I ended up staying, so that contract got extended a couple of times and I stayed in that role for 2 years. And the team on the unit had said that I was the only dietitian to actually not rotate out of that role because I had developed such an interest in it. So that was the start of it. That was working with children and adolescents. And then when those 2 years were up, I looked for work in eating disorders to continue along that pathway. And I ended up getting a few different part-time roles. So one was an adult inpatient unit in a private hospital in Sydney. One was just some contract work for the Butterfly Foundation, which is Australia's eating disorder charity. And then another was working in the public system in community outpatients for adults as well.
Nice. And so what was it that kind of grabbed you on that ward where you said, okay, I really loved working with these people? What is it about that side of nutrition, or what is it about that population that you really enjoy?
Yeah, I think initially it started out that as a dietitian, I felt really valued working in that team. And I think that's one of the things that initially got me quite hooked. And then as my knowledge of eating disorders and disordered eating started to expand, what I really resonated with was the non-diet approach to nutrition and stepping more into that counselling and behaviour change model. And I think that just aligned with my values and how I preferred to work more than working in other clinical areas where maybe it was a bit more prescriptive, less counselling included. I really liked that I got to know the patients that I was working with and build rapport, potentially for, being able to work with them for many months or years as well and see that change.
Yeah.
Yeah. In eating disorders, it's so diverse because, yes, you're talking about nutrition and health, but then you have to have a knowledge, because it's a mental health role, you have to have a knowledge of the physical health stuff as well.
Yeah.
It's great that you can keep your toes in other areas while specialising in eating disorders.
No, it was interesting when you were saying earlier, okay, when I was studying initially, maybe I thought I was going to go into sports nutrition, because this was also my background. At the time of me studying nutrition, I was doing just for fun, like marathons and triathlons and cycling, and was into sport in a way that I'm not into it anymore. And yeah, a lot of people are like, oh, you should go into sports nutrition. And the reality was for me is like, this is just so dry. There isn't something that really grabs me here. Versus when I started working more with people who were wanting to stop dieting and then disordered eating and then kind of went down that road, there was just, I liked the messiness. Like I liked the messiness of how to have this all kind of together. And as you said, like the counseling piece, to be having conversations that, yeah, we're connected to food, but there's lots of other things that are going on here. And so that really sort of excited me and is what I like doing. And also you genuinely are making a difference in someone's life. Like to have someone be living with something for 20 years or 30 years and then now no longer is suffering with this thing, it's like a huge, huge thing. Like it feels very, very meaningful. And for you, if you're working with kids who've been suffering with this, even if it has been a very short amount of time, to see how devastating that's going to be to their family and how scary that's going to be, and to them be really making a difference. Like I can see how you got hooked.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, definitely. And I think too, it's when you support people through to recovery, and then it's also the shift that you see within how, if they have a family, they raise their children and conversations that they have with their friends and family. And so it's almost like a bit of a ripple effect in a way that the work that you do with one person can also have an impact on other people.
Yeah, massively. And I agree with that, because you're not just helping that one person. It is like, okay, this then helps their kids. This helps the other people in their community. I do think it has that huge ripple effect. And you recognize, okay, what we were focusing on when we started to now what we're chatting about now, there's just like so much difference here in terms of both like the kind of conversations that we can have, but also just like I can see the quality of life has completely changed from where you were to start with.
Yeah.
And so I want to go through some of the different areas that I talked about, kind of just pulling up some notes here to figure out where is best to start. But let's talk about compulsive exercise and overcoming compulsive exercise. And I guess like with you and the population you're seeing, how often is compulsive movement part of the client or part of the people you're working with?
A very high percentage, I would say maybe around half, if not more, would be using exercise or physical activity as a behavior that they're engaging in to control their weight or body shape, and if not currently something they've engaged in the past.
Yeah. And is there any patterns you see with this? Because I'm thinking, when I think about this, like often people's eating disorder starts and the exercise component isn't there. I mean, for some people it's there from the get-go, but often it's not there. And then at some point it starts to enter in. And then once it enters in, then it becomes just, it feels like this is so permanent. I don't know how I could be without this thing here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you one trend that I have definitely noticed is that for anyone, and this is a lot of people that I'm supporting, whose eating disorder developed during the pandemic, exercise is a huge part of their eating disorder presentation because it was the main coping mechanism for a lot of people to fill in time, to help manage anxiety, to help manage isolation. So a lot of people at the moment are presenting with compulsive exercise as a result of developing the eating disorder through those difficult times.
Yeah, and I actually see a lot of people where they'd been in this state of quasi-recovery for however long, whether it's a couple of years or it's been a couple of decades, but it was then the pandemic that then sort of tipped that over. And that's when everything started to ramp back up. And yeah, as you said, it was often the exercise piece that then started that. Like, I know there was so much stuff going online of like, you can do these exercise classes for free. And I talk about like not putting on weight over the isolation period and all. It's just this like perfect storm for everything getting worse or starting for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess what are some of the fears that people have when talking about exercise or talking about making changes to exercise, and how are you dealing with some of this stuff?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones is the fear of weight gain or weight changes when reducing physical activity. Another fear is then maybe developing other coping mechanisms that are unhealthy. So sometimes for some people, it may be that they're trying to avoid engaging in purging through vomiting, for example. And so exercise becomes one of their main forms of coping with difficult emotions or numbing emotions. So sometimes it can be a way to avoid an alternate unhealthy coping mechanism. So yeah, I think they're probably the weight changes are one of the biggest fears. And within that is the change in body composition. So this fear of losing muscle mass or that leaner appearance. So the way that I would support my clients through that is through education, firstly, but then on a more practical level through sort of graded exposure and more of a CBT approach to mini experiments. So let's see what happens. What is your hypothesis of we do reduce exercise by XYZ, and let's test it out. Let's see what actually happens. So that's the approach that I'll use for a lot of people that I'm supporting.
Okay, nice. I think one of the other ones that comes up a lot for clients, and this is probably an indication of just how exhausted they are. There's this fear of, if I stop, I will never start ever again. If I stop doing the walking or the like fill in the blank exercise, I will never want to start exercising ever again. And I can't have that happen. And so, yeah, again, I think there's an education piece connected to this, but yeah, I think talking through the fact that like, yeah, you're feeling this way because currently you're doing things that either you don't want to do or you do enjoy doing, but you're in a state that is just so depleted that it makes it unenjoyable for you to be able to do it.
Absolutely. And I think just having this conversation, the other one that comes to mind is that the fear of the loss of identity of being someone who is, in quotations, fit.
Yeah.
Because that builds up to being such a large part of a person's life is the fitness and activity component. So I think a lot of conversations I also have are around what life looks like when hours of the day aren't spent engaging in physical activity.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, like another one kind of piggybacking off that of like, how do I fill the void? Like if I'm spending so much of this time, there's the worry of like, how do I even know how to spend that time? What's going to happen in terms of the thoughts that will come up? And so, yeah, there's just the anxiety of all the what ifs that arise.
Yeah. And I think also that sense of if I'm not moving my body, then I perceive myself to be lazy.
Yeah.
Or they experience a lot of those negative emotions of guilt and shame around stopping something that they, again, in quotations, worked so hard to get to.
Yeah. I mean, the fitness piece is one that comes up a lot. And then, yeah, having a conversation around like, what does it actually mean to be fit? Because again, for so many people, they're like, yeah, I feel really fit, or if I stop doing this, I won't be fit. But it's like, okay, well, outside of the window where you're actually in the gym or doing the exercise, maybe there's an hour or 2 hour honeymoon period after that, but you're clearly exhausted. You're telling me you're exhausted. Like you're not having fitness for all of the other aspects of life. There's a great quote from Scott Abel, who he kind of defines fitness. And look, I'm not on board with everything Scott Abel has to say. I think he's gone down a path over these many, many years where I'm definitely not in alignment. But yeah, he talks about like true fitness is the ability to handle all the changes and demands of your everyday life with a relative ease. And so fitness isn't just like how well can I swim a lap or run around a track or lift weights. It's like how well am I able to cope with all the demands of life?
Yeah, absolutely. It's that functional component, isn't it? And I have conversations as well around fitness is not just cardiovascular and strength. It's balance, mobility, flexibility, which if we think about it from that functional standpoint are equally as important, if not more in some aspects as well, in a person's life. But so yeah, it's getting people to be able to take a step back and look at that bigger picture.
Totally. And then the same ways we talk about like physical health and then mental health and emotional health, you can do the same thing with fitness. And I think really a lot of the litmus test is like, where are you in terms of your psychological flexibility? Because yeah, again, you might be very fit in inverted commas when you're running, but in terms of your capacity to be able to have fitness to deal with all of these other challenges, where are you currently at with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think, there's definitely such an important conversation around identifying what fitness and what health mean for a person and what is a more balanced or nuanced view of that.
Yeah. And in terms of the identity piece, how are you working on that with someone? Because again, it comes up a lot.
Yeah. So one of the activities I'll ask a person to do is really to look at how much of their life is being taken up by their eating disorder thoughts and cognitions, thoughts about their body, activity, and then doing some values work around outside of the eating disorder, what is important, what values does a person want to live their life by, and then looking at how we can start to incorporate that and make their recovery more aligned with the life that they want to live. Slowly, it's starting to incorporate some of that back into their life so it can push out and displace how much importance is being put on activity and body image, shape, weight, and size. Yeah. So that's around building new connections and community. It's about trying new things. It's about supporting someone to get to a place that they can start to re-engage in things like travel and social eating. And I'm sure you and I both see it all the time, is that when people start to do that and what's important shifts, it happens very intuitively and very beautifully that a person will place less emphasis on activity and body image and disordered behaviors.
Yeah, because the thing is, if you've got not much else going on in your life apart from the exercise that you do and the restriction that you do, like it's hard to give those things up because it is then truly like, well, what else do I then have? Versus if there are all of these other things that are starting to come into someone's life, it's kind of demonstrating to them like, this isn't the only thing that I have. I mean, there's a quote, again, from Tim Ferriss, who, again, I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but he talks about identity diversification and the importance of that. And like, if you have your identity connected to just one thing or just two things and one of those goes south, like that's not great. Versus if you've got it connected to many, many, many different things, it really ensures you. And so, yeah, I think so often there's this feeling of like, got to figure a thing out first and then I'll go out and I'll start creating this new identity. And really it's kind of the other way around. It's like through doing all of these other activities that you start to build that new identity. And yeah, I'm the same with you. I do a lot of values work because it's so obvious then when you get that distance, when you start to do some writing down of values or some reflection of values of like, I know I say this is my identity and I know I say I don't want to lose this, but actually when I look at it, this isn't how I want to be living my life. This does not align with the values of what I truly think are important.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that it's not a quick fix at all. And this takes months and years to really overcome and to build that new identity. So it's definitely not something that will happen quickly, and you wouldn't want it to because there's so many important skills to build along the way. And I think as well, outside of the identity component is that emotional regulation part of why and how physical activity is being used from the emotional regulation perspective. And again, that skill building on how to manage your emotions in a healthy way. It takes time to develop that. And so it's also just taking the pressure off on the timeline that would need to be how we would see that progress.
Yeah. And do you have any recommendations that you're with clients of like, hey, typically I'm removing exercise slowly, or I typically do it all at once, or it depends on the person?
It depends. Yeah. Everything I do is always the answer is it depends on the person. I've had people that I've supported that we have gone cold turkey with physical activity, and then others a more graded approach. I think for most people, a more graded approach has been the way that we've gone.
Yeah, I would say the same with me. And I also know that when someone does go cold turkey, that actually the ability to be okay with that is much more rapid than people ever possibly imagine.
Yeah.
And so that's always the message I want to get out of like, look, you can do this, but I also want you to know this, because I think there's fear for most people is the exercise piece is going to be the most challenging thing to deal with. And actually, it's one of the quickest when people genuinely do just stop exercising.
Yeah. Yeah. I had an event earlier this year, and one of the lovely ladies that I helped support all the way through to full recovery I invited her to speak at the event, and she was someone that we did the cold turkey approach to activity. And I remember it was such a difficult time, but we'd agreed it was the period over Christmas and New Year's because her children were at home, and it just aligned with, okay, there's lots of social events. So there's maybe not as much time as what you'd normally be able to put aside for activity.
And built-in distraction as well.
Yeah. And she shared about that experience at the event, and she said it was one of the best decisions she'd ever made. And the following session we had after New Year, she managed it. And there was no urge, very minimal urge for her to re-engage in that. And then over time, we built in more healthy levels and enjoyable levels of physical activity.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. I think this is my experience, and I think I always want to be very upfront about it, because I think it is counterintuitive to what people imagine it will be.
And I think also there's this fear of, a lot of people say to me, but Talia, physical activity is part of being a human, and undoubtedly it is. But sometimes we need to pull things back before we can add them back in again. So it's always the intention behind that I speak about, and just reinforcing that I'm not going to ever say to someone that for the rest of their life they're going to have to avoid X, Y, Z in terms of physical activity. As a dietitian, I want people to enjoy movement. I want them to move their bodies. Again, just busting that fear of, if I reduce my activity levels now, it does not mean that is for life.
Yeah. Like the goal is like, one, how can we get you to a physical state where you're genuinely benefiting from this exercise? Because at the place that you're in, you're actually not benefiting. Your body is not able to do the proper repairs and adaptations so that you truly get the health benefits from this. And then two, we want it to be in a place where it is you in the driver's seat choosing when you exercise, and doing that from a place of genuine enjoyment, as opposed to, I have to do this, it's compulsive, I'm doing this because I need to change my body, or because of the fear of it changing, or that's the thing I need to allow myself to eat food, like all of these rules that are connected to it. So it's like, how do we get to a different place with that? And I guess the analogy, like you said, like having a break, like if someone has broken their leg, you have a break. You have a break so that it heals, or at least in theory. Because I know that there are people who don't. And yeah, but if we were recommending what is the best thing to do if you've just broken your leg, it would be to have a break so that thing can heal. And it's the same thing with recovery. It's not a permanent thing. This is for an allotted amount of time so that healing can occur.
Yeah. Yeah, I've used that before.
Yeah. And so, yeah, talking about then digestive issues. And so from your perspective, like what are some of the more common things that you're seeing from this perspective?
Yeah, I think the most common symptoms would be bloating, abdominal pain, constipation being the biggest, and slow digestion. So that sense of feeling full very early from a smaller portion of food, and feeling full absolutely all day and for days on end, but still needing to eat and challenge that fullness.
And for you, like how often are you seeing people where actually digestive issues are stuff that really predates the eating disorder? Because I think this is something that's pretty common as well.
Yeah, it is common. I can't give a percentage. There is definitely a mix of people that I support that do have pre-existing digestive issues. Now, whether that be from a medical perspective with something like celiac disease or even having IBS before the eating disorder developed. And we know that in terms of developing digestive issues in disordered eating, having a pre-existing digestive issue can actually be one of those factors that lead into the disordered eating developing. So yes, definitely see both.
Yeah. And so what are the approaches? How are you helping people with digestive issues? And I know there could be many possible things, but what comes to mind?
Yeah, so it depends on what the symptom is. But for example, with constipation, I guess from one side of it, it's having those conversations and similar to the exercise, providing that education around why the constipation might be occurring. Now, for the majority of people that I'm supporting, it's due to malnutrition. So body not receiving enough nutrition for the gut to function as it should. So one of the best things that I can support people that I'm working with to do is actually to eat an adequate intake. And then looking at from it more of a practical level, looking at fluids, looking at being able to trial things like prunes or kiwis to help with constipation. Sometimes it might be short-term a laxative that's going to soften the stool. So try to avoid stimulative laxatives, but sometimes it might be just short-term just to help bowels to open so that we can reduce the discomfort that a person is experiencing. And then you're looking at things like heat packs, not wearing tight clothes, distraction. That's more so for bloating and abdominal pain than constipation. Other things with bloating, for example, it might be, again, doing a short course of peppermint oil, looking at different meditation and breathing techniques. Sometimes even just a hot drink or a weighted blanket can just help while some of the symptoms sort of rise, and then we know they're going to fall with time. So that's where distraction activities can come in really helpful. So yeah, I think one of the hardest, one of the biggest challenges that I see is a person eating enough while they're experiencing such distressing gastrointestinal symptoms.
Yeah. And it becomes this catch-22 because so often the foods that they are eating are also connected to why they're having so many of these troubles as well. Like, one, they're not particularly calorie dense, but two, they're often quite difficult to digest. And so you're getting this double whammy of like, we're not getting a huge amount of energy, and then you're asking me to digest something that is quite difficult. And then because there is then this increased digestive discomfort, the natural feeling is like, okay, well, I need to reduce what I'm having even more. And it then just becomes this really vicious cycle. And so often when dealing with this, it is starting to look at, okay, well, what are some of the things that you're eating? And like, we really need to be getting in things that are more calorie dense, but also are going to be easier on your digestive system. And often they are going to be foods that are scarier to people or are more off limits.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with the catch-22. I have that conversation all the time, and that I say, the one thing that I need to get you to do is short-term going to cause you a lot of pain, which is eating. A lot of people are often surprised when I say to them to remove or reduce significantly the amount of vegetables and fruit in their diet from a fiber perspective and volume perspective. So I definitely agree and definitely work in the same way and opting for more nutrient-dense foods during those times that people are experiencing such significant GI symptoms.
Yeah, it can be a hard sell to start with, but I do find that actually when people start to make that change, again, if they genuinely follow through on it, they do notice an improvement fairly quickly. Again, it can be different from person to person, but yeah, once that volume has been decreased a little bit, and once that we're bringing in more energy, the digestive system does start to upregulate, even if it can be slower than someone may ideally want in terms of, I want it done today.
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing to just spend a moment just to reinforce and remind people is that your bowels do not have to open every single day. Is that it can be healthy and normal for some people for their bowels to open once every 2 days. Sometimes people get very fixated on their bowels opening every single day at the same time, and then they'll engage in behaviors that worsen that. And then again, you just get stuck into that vicious cycle where then they're constipated, but they're engaging in behaviors that aren't helping their bowels to open more naturally.
Yeah.
And that's when laxative abuse, starts to creep in for some people, is that it reduces the anxiety and the feeling of discomfort to open their bowels every day.
Yeah, totally. And I think it can be laxatives, but I've had a number of clients where it's like water that they're trying to drink a ton of water to try and help that situation. And even if it does, at the same time, it does not help the situation, because there's a lot of collateral damage that is then occurring because you're drinking this very high quantity of water, whether that is having a negative effect on your appetite. It could be that I really struggle to then be able to eat before this has happened. So as you say, that there's all this pressure that is then placed on having this bowel movement, and becomes this much bigger thing than it really needs to be. And there are easier ways to help this thing to occur.
Yeah, definitely. When someone is eating so little or engaging in significant levels of compensated behavior such as vomiting, very common to see that a person might not open their bowels for up to 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Which is very distressing. And so it's supporting the person to understand why that might be, and then putting in a lot of the strategies that we've just spoken about.
Yeah. Because again, if that's the case, someone's then getting to the point where it's like, I don't want to put more food in because it's going to get even more uncomfortable. But again, not doing that then just makes this a hell of a lot worse.
Yeah.
Is there anything else just on the digestion stuff that you would either suggest, or things that are coming up for people?
Yeah, so I think that one of the red flags to talk about is the low-FODMAP diet.
Yeah, for sure.
Which I see all the time. That I've supported so many people who had previously been recommended a low FODMAP diet for IBS. Now, whether that was a true diagnosis of IBS or it was just symptoms that had developed as a result of disordered eating disguised under a label of IBS symptoms, that needs unpacking and its own. Definitely just to talk about low FODMAP diet or restricting your diet and how that can worsen your symptoms, further reduces your good gut bacteria. So with something like the low FODMAP diet, listeners aren't aware of it, is an elimination type diet where different categories of carbohydrates, digestible sugars are eliminated for a period of 6 to 8 weeks, and then reintroduced one by one over about a 6-week period.
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of people who have been recommended the low FODMAP diet, and instead of staying on it just for 6 or so weeks, stay on it for months or even a couple of years.
Yeah.
Which really is so harmful for their digestive health. I think it's that vicious circle of, well, I'm going to restrict things because temporarily it makes me feel better, but then in the long term, it's actually going to make me feel so much worse. So when we think about digestive issues, what we can add, and adding variety is actually going to be better for the gut than restricting the number of foods that a person's eating.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Because, I agree. I don't know if it's still as big as it was, but there was a period where the low FODMAP diet felt like it was everywhere and everyone was being recommended it. And it was like the thing that you just need. Like, if you've got any bloating, like, you should try this thing. And you're right. I think there are a lot of people who start it and then just never stop doing it. And if I'm thinking about digestion and supporting digestion, especially if I'm thinking about it from eating disorders, but it's still the same where anyone who's dieting or anyone who's disordered eating is like, you need energy to run all of your various systems and organs. And so if you're not getting in enough energy, that has to be the number one thing that you focus on, so that you can give it the best possible chance to be able to be digesting your food properly. Yeah. And so I think that's where I recommend people start. And I guess the tricky thing with that is the response is like, oh, but I am eating a lot. I am eating X number of calories and that should be enough, or I plugged it into MyFitnessPal and this is what it said for me. But when I look at what someone's eating, I'm like, you're not eating enough food to adequately support all of your systems, including your digestive system.
Yeah, definitely. In addition to that, I very commonly see dietary restrictions like gluten-free or dairy-free. Yep. And I guess I just wanted to touch on, when we talk about digestive issues, is that due to the gut being in a malnourished state, some people do develop, intolerances because their gut breaking down, digesting, absorbing nutrients properly. So that is something that short-term people might experience. But again, it's a short-term, fingers crossed, phase where, yes, we might provide recommendations to slightly tweak the diet. For example, lactose-free dairy, just to make it a bit more gentle on the gut. But it's not something, hopefully, that people will have to follow longer term.
Yeah, if you're not getting enough for your digestion to work properly, it's not producing enough of the hydrochloric acid or the stomach enzyme or the digestive enzyme, sorry. And so there's lots of ways that it can then appear that I'm sensitive to this thing. And it might be that you are actually sensitive in this state. That the state that your body is in means you are sensitive, but it's not because you are inherently sensitive to that thing. It's just because of how your body is currently functioning. Like adding in the power of the nocebo effect as well. There can be a lot of belief around the fact that this thing is bad, and then I believe that I'm intolerant to it, or I believe that it has an impact on me, and that then creating an impact. So yeah, the nocebo effect is the opposite of the placebo effect. Yeah, there's been a lot of studies done on both of those things. Like you take someone who has a really bad knee who needs surgery, and you open up the knee and you do a sham surgery where you basically just open it up, do nothing, stitch it back up, and people report that this has made a really massive difference and this surgery has been life-changing. It just really demonstrates the power of the mind. And if we're living in a society where all of the news outlets and all of the media you're consuming is about the dangers of gluten or the dangers of dairy or whatever it is, it's very easy to internalize that, especially if you're living with an eating disorder. And so I think it's often a combination of many things for why there is this added digestive distress and this added sensitivity.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, can connect really well to the gut-brain axis.
Yeah.
And remembering that, a lot of people that we're supporting are constantly in, heightened state of anxiety, and the impact that alone has on their experience of different digestive symptoms.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, you said that you're not seeing as much of the low FODMAP being recommended. And I think that's because now there is more guidance around, first line evidence of, even trialing things like yoga and gut-directed hypnotherapy. Meditation instead of the low FODMAP diet is just as effective. So we know how important the gut-brain axis is in supporting digestive health.
Yeah. I mean, I like your thinking that maybe it's because these other things are being recommended. I think there's just as many people on the internet who will say anything, and it's just like the FODMAP says no longer it's time in the sun. Like the fact that carnivore is a thing proves that it's not about we found something that's better, more evidence-based. It's just like there's something else that is the flavor of the month.
Yeah, there definitely is. I try to remain optimistic, at least that people that know what they're talking about, qualified, won't be recommending it.
Yeah, totally. And I focus a lot in terms of polyvagal theory and the nervous system. And yeah, if you're proverbially running away from a line because that's the state that your digestive, or that's the state your nervous system is in, then it's not prioritizing digestion. And again, the catch-22 with this is the way that you then support your nervous system is to be then bringing in more food. And there is going to be this lag time between that happening and your digestion improving. But if you're constantly in a state where your nervous system is in this fight or flight or is in more of a shutdown state, yeah, of course, that's going to have an impact on digestion.
And it can even be a person's experience of, for example, they're challenging a specific food and they're extremely anxious before it, and then after they have it, they experience bloating and abdominal pain.
Yeah.
Their mind says, well, it's because of the food that you just ate, but actually it's because of the anxiety that the person's just experienced.
Yeah.
Yeah, really important to tease that out and have those conversations.
Yeah, and or I've had this food and this has caused it, but actually I didn't eat something for the earlier part of the day. I then skipped a snack because of this upcoming event. And so, yeah, where the focus gets placed is on this particularly bad food versus actually there were all of these other things that are going on that are more likely to be driving this thing.
Yeah.
So let's talk about RAVES. So as I said at the start, this is something I'm aware of, but I don't think I've talked about on the podcast before. So I'd love to hear you share. And I think it is an Australian thing.
Yes, yeah. So full credit to Shane Jeffrey. He's an accredited practicing dietitian in Australia. He lives in Queensland and he created the RAVES model. So I think that's why a lot of Australian dietitians and nutritionists are more aware of it because it came out in Australia first. But I'm definitely hearing more people across the globe learning about it. And I think Shane is doing workshops now, especially in Australia on the RAVES model.
Cool.
So RAVES is a framework that he developed to really capture the phased approach to normalizing a person's relationship with food. So he breaks it down into 3 phases. So the first phase is where the R and the A of RAVES come in. So that's regularity and adequacy. So regularity is establishing a regular pattern of eating. So your 3 meals, 3 snacks every day. And then your adequacy is building on up to an amount of food that's going to meet your nutritional needs and goals. Phase 2 is when we look at the VES of RAVES. So that is, V is for variety. So adding foods back into the diet, expanding within food groups, as well as adding in fear foods and overcoming food rules. And then we have E is eating socially. So being able to join in on social occasions, cook the food that you're making for others, also eat it, being comfortable to eat in different environments, workplace, home, friend's house, cousin's house, being able to eat out and not be influenced by the calories on the menu, for example.
Yeah.
Lots of different components to that. And then your S is for spontaneity or flexibility. So moving away from a prescriptive way of eating, being able to say yes to things without having it been planned. Moving on from there, you have phase 3, which is intuitive eating. The framework is something that I think a lot of nutrition professionals do automatically, but it just provides a nice framework. And when I talk to people that I'm supporting about it and I talk through each of the phases, it really helps them to identify actually where they're at. And so, I bring it to a lot of the discussions that I have, especially when someone wants to run before they can walk and wants to eat intuitively, which is fantastic. But hey, look at this approach. We need to actually go back to just eating regularly first. So I think it's really helpful in supporting people to understand actually what needs to happen. Not to say that things, you might establish regularity and you might be adding some variety at the same time, but it's really where the focus or the spotlight is on.
Yeah, totally. And as I said, I talk about this loads with clients. I just don't use this acronym, but when I think about the stages, I really like the way that they're described, because I think what can often be a trap with people is that they will try and bring in the variety piece way sooner than they necessarily need to. And I'm always like, calories trumps everything else. If you're not eating enough food, all we're doing is moving deck chairs on the Titanic. It's not helping to be them bringing in these different things, because you need more energy. And often when more variety comes in, often the amount of food can take a little bit of a hit, because it's like, I'm doing this meal and it feels so big. And so there's often an overestimating of how much is in that food. Or I had this as my morning snack, and because it felt bigger, I then didn't have my afternoon snack. And so it means that the amount of intake someone has can take a hit. And you can then look at the next, the last week or the last 2 weeks, and it's like, great, more foods have come in and actually your intake's come down. And that's just not where it needs to be right now.
Yeah. When a person moves through to that phase 2, when they aren't ready, I completely agree that if there's so much, it happens all the time that people are so focused on adding in variety and food challenges that they end up compensating.
Yeah.
They're not at a stage where they have the skills to be able to manage the variety and the higher energy foods without compensatory behaviors creeping in.
Yeah. And look, for anyone listening, if you are able to bring in more of the foods while increasing, great. I'm not dissuading you from doing that. And there's times where it has to happen because of the foods that someone's eating. It's not viable to get you to the amount of energy that you need because they're so high volume, low energy. We're going to have to bring in some more energy dense foods. But I don't necessarily even think about that as variety. And just thinking about that as like, okay, how do we bring in the right kinds of foods that are going to support you in this moment?
Yeah. And I think where you sort of touch on, and I completely agree, and I'm glad you brought this up, is that it's so individualized, and some people do well on what is coined, all in, where if you have hunger signals that are present and that you can respond to, and you're able to eat enough, and eating different food isn't going to impact how much you have, then that is absolutely one way to go as well.
Yeah, totally. I'm on board with that. And again, it's just not for the majority of people. And I think what it often then becomes a little bit of a trap, because it then means like, oh, I'm not going to plan. Like I'm going to get to the meal and I'm going to be able to do it. And then it doesn't happen. And then it's like, again, tonight, definitely going to be able to do it. And then it doesn't happen. And I think when I look at the two letters in terms of the first part of this, of that regularity and adequacy, typically there is going to be some planning for that to happen. And I'm not against planning. I mean, I'm not necessarily even against a meal plan. Trying to make a decision in the moment for most people in the depths of an eating disorder is just not a thing that's going to be dependable enough. Maybe you can do it some of the time, but not dependably so. And so in the beginning, it is like, how do we get enough regularity and enough energy coming in, and then we can move on to these other pieces. And where there is real decision in advance, like, okay, this is what it's gonna look like. So I can pre-plan the shopping, I can have things in advance, I can do it, because yes, we want to get to the place of spontaneity, but as you say, you don't try and run before you can walk. Like, let's be able to get enough food in first.
Yeah. And I find that each of the phases sort of aligns with how prescriptive the eating needs to be more often than not. Is that phase one, the R and the A is when a high number of people will be on meal plans.
Yeah.
And all meals and snacks are planned in advance, and you know exactly where and when you're going to be. That's absolutely fine. That's what's needed for that phase.
Yeah.
Then, phase two is when, because you're adding in variety and bits and pieces, I find that template of how much a person needs to eat is there, but there's a bit more flexibility in the moment of what foods a person might eat in that phase. And then you're moving on to intuitive eating and really moving away from any form of prescription.
Yeah. The thing I would add, and I don't know how the person who invented it, I don't know how he talks about it in terms of adequacy. Like, when I'm working with someone, it's always like, these are the minimums. Yes. So I think that can also often be a trap of like, oh, like I can't go over this. This is what I have to stick to. I'm like, this is a minimum. If you want to eat more, if you want to have more snacks, if you want to have more meals, if you want, like, you have my 100% encouragement and permission to do this. And so very much framing it in that way as opposed to maximums.
Yes, absolutely. I very much have those conversations too, especially when we're thinking about, how can we build a meal that's got fats, carbs, protein, and a bit of fiber in it. And again, just reinforcing, when someone's so confused about what normal looks like, you really have to have that conversation around, well, this is just, I frame it as, well, this is a starting point. It's the minimum. This is just some guidance on where we start. But then as we move away from so much structure, you're going to be in the driving seat and you're going to start to learn what portion's going to satisfy you.
And I think also when we're thinking about what is normal, it's what is normal for eating disorder recovery. Because I think so often that can be oh, well, I went out and no one was eating that much and so I couldn't do it, or my partner doesn't eat that much. And I'm always like, yeah, well, your partner's not in recovery from an eating disorder. And even if you are fully recovered, you may still eat more than your partner or eat more than than anyone else who is at dinner with you. And that is completely okay and normal. If you need more food, you need more food. There's nothing bad about that unless you start to create a meaning connected to that thing.
Yeah, definitely. It's what is normal for you as an individual. Yeah.
Yeah. The only one I would also mention, and I know that this is meant to be just a suggestion of like where these come in terms of phase one or phase two or phase three. I've had this happen a number of times recently, and this is why I'm bringing it up, we think very often with eating disorders, like eating socially is this really stressful thing, and it often is. And for some people, eating socially is where they're doing their best eating. Mm. And so for many clients, it's like, I notice when you're going out with your friends, or I notice when you're having this weekend away, you actually do better.
Mm.
We're really leaning into that of like, how can you eat more with people? Can you be going out for lunches with your work colleagues? Because that actually really helps you. Can you be meeting up with friends after work? Like, I think there can be this real stereotype. And I want to say that if anyone notices actually they do better eating in the company of others, go do that.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. And I think this is where a person's experience is so different, because I've worked with people before where I was having the conversation around, well, let's not add too much variety because, we're focusing on the regularity and adequacy. And part of their eating disorder presentation was actually that they had rules that now I'm going to get this the wrong way around. So we were reducing the variety. Yeah, so they had rules around repeating meals. So then actually when we were focusing on reducing variety, that was actually working with their eating disorder. And it actually was not the most challenging option. So within all of that framework, there's going to be things that resonate with people and are helpful, but then that's where that individualization comes in as well.
Yeah, definitely. Because I agree that there are times where, the variety piece actually is the thing that sort of unlocks a lot of other things. And so I was like, cool, I'm noticing that this is so helpful for you, or we're having conversations around it and it feels like there's something really important here. And so cool, let's, like, I think you said this earlier in the conversation, and it's something I say a lot, like, let's run the experiment.
Mm.
So many people within the eating disorder is like, I've got to get this right. And I've got to figure this thing out. And I'm like, that doesn't lead to a lot of curiosity. It doesn't lead to a lot of openness. It leads to a lot of fear and rigidity. So like, how can we have this thing become a lot more, running experiment? Let's see what happens. It's not, you don't have to get it right. Like whatever happens, we're going to learn something from this thing. And so if it feels like variety is important, let's focus on that for the next week, see what happens. Yeah. And so the final thing I just want to ask just is around common myths when it comes to nutrition and eating disorder recovery. When we're thinking about this from a food perspective, and look, I'm asking a very, very big question here, but what are some of the more common things, and maybe that are common now, like in 2024? What are some of the things that people are coming to you talking about?
The hot topic is definitely ultra processed foods.
Okay.
So I'm seeing a number of people avoiding foods like bread, for example, that used to be avoided from more a carbohydrate perspective, but now the conversation is, well, I'm avoiding them because they have additives. Bread has additives and unhealthy ingredients in it. The food remains the same, but the purpose behind it, I've seen, has shifted slightly. So instead of the sugar being demonized, it's now that it contains more than 4 ingredients in the food product.
And I think that's so true with so many things. Like it would have been bread because it was carbs, then bread because it was wheat and gluten, and then bread because it's ultra processed. Like, as you say, it's the same food, but we're now, okay, we got past that one, but now there's this other reason or other objection of why these things are a bad thing to be eating.
Yeah, ultra processed foods is the new hot topic, but as I mentioned before, carbohydrates are still one of the foods that are most often feared. Higher sugar, high fat foods as well, still at the top of the list for a lot of people, having a misconception around what happens if that food is eaten. I think something that more recently sort of feeds into this is the calories being included on UK menus, the messages around the pandemic and obesity and weight changes during the pandemic. So I think a lot of that is still seeing the after effect of that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think kind of from around the same kind of time, like people being able to wear glucose monitors, so things that were originally aimed very much at people with diabetes, now becoming this thing that everyone should be wearing and monitoring all the time, and that really feeding into the fear around carbohydrates generally, but sugars more narrowly. And they're just kind of increasing the level of worry and panic connected to it.
Yeah, and of such common foods, I was going to say very normal foods as well. Fruit, for example, is something that is a food that grows from the land that we've been eating for such a long time, has now gained an added level of fear and misconceptions.
Yes, for sure. I don't think it always pays a huge amount of benefit to go and look like what other people used to eat across the years. There are definitely cultures and places where at certain points of the year they're having 50, 60, 70% of their calories be honey, because that was what was available. And so, yeah, I think that we have this real fear around sugar. And so, yeah, just reminding people of that, of like, there are people who are eating a ton of this stuff who are in very good health.
Yeah, I say that often just with rice as an example. When people are so fearful of rice, I ask a person, can you have a think and name all the countries or cultures where rice is an ingredient that you might actually eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Just expanding that view of, just because we live in one culture or society and are receiving these messages, a different culture and society can be receiving a completely different message.
Yeah. Is there anything that we haven't gone through that you wanted me to ask?
In regards to myths?
Oh, well, it could be in regards to myths, or it could be just regards to really anything.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've covered a number of things.
Well, look, then the final question is just like, where can people be going if they want to find out more about you?
Yeah, so you can head to my Instagram page, which is TC Nutrition. And then what I say to people is just to head to the link in my bio to connect through to my website, because my website is my name and it can be tricky to spell. So www.taliacecchele.com.
Cool. Well, I will put all the links on the show notes and people can click through from your bio. But yeah, all the links will be there and people can find out more about you there. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
So that was my conversation with Talia Cecchele. Her site is full of great blog posts. She's done a really good job on Instagram. So if you want more of what we covered in this show, then please check it out. As I said at the top, I'm taking on new clients. If you want to not be in the grips of an eating disorder, if you would like to have your life back, to have the freedom to go on trips, to have the freedom to take a rest day, to have all of these things naturally and easily occur in your life, that is what full recovery can provide for you. And I would love to help you get there. So if you are interested in this, then send an email to info@7-health.com and in the subject line, include the word coaching. So that is it for this week's show. I will be back with another new episode next week. Until then, take care of yourself and I will see you soon.